The first time I lied to state investigators, I had 43 days left on my contract and more money waiting for me than anyone in my family had ever seen in one place. They asked when I first understood there was a person living below Elliot Voss's house. I said the storm. That was not true. By then, the lie was already older than weather. When people hear a number big enough, they like to pretend the moral problem is easy. They sit there in their normal kitchen chairs, on their normal salaries, and say things like I would never sign that or no amount of money is worth that kind of weirdness. They imagine temptation arrives with music under it. Warning signs. A face that already looks dangerous. That is not how mine arrived. Mine came as a PDF, a relocation package, and an interview that lasted 19 minutes. At 26, I was living in a studio in Beaverton with one north-facing window and a refrigerator that made a clicking sound all night. I worked in operations support for an insurance company that loved the phrase team culture and used it mostly as a replacement for raises. I had student debt sitting just under 50 grand, a car with a transmission that had started shuddering at stoplights, and a mother who called every Sunday and asked how I was doing in the careful voice people use when they already suspect the answer. I always said I was fine. Fine is a very affordable word. The recruiter who contacted me worked through one of those executive placement firms that only seem to exist to move exhausted women into richer people's orbit. She said the role was hybrid but residents preferred. She said the principal valued discretion, speed, and emotional steadiness. She said the compensation reflected the complexity. I assumed that meant maybe $200,000 and a health plan nice enough to include dental without a war. Then she sent the actual package. Base compensation was $4.8 million over 12 months, paid in quarterly releases into an escrow account and a completion bonus at the end of term. Housing on the estate. Vehicle access when authorized. Full benefits. Non-disparagement language. Strict confidentiality provisions. And one section, not highlighted and read the way my source story had it, but boxed off in pale gray as if it were merely administrative. Employee acknowledges the existence of restricted subgrade operations within the East Annex and agrees not to seek access to request information regarding, or discuss said operations with staff, vendors, guests, or the principal unless expressly directed by the principal. Restricted subgrade operations. That was the phrase. Cold enough to sound harmless. Corporate enough to dull instinct. I read it 3 times. Then I opened my banking app, looked at my checking account, looked at my rent reminder, looked at the private loan payment due that Friday, and kept reading. The principal was Elliot Voss. Everybody in Oregon knew the name. Even if they didn't know, they knew it. His company had started in rehabilitation tech, moved into adaptive learning systems, then into consumer hardware, then into whatever category billionaires invent when they no longer want their money to sound like it came from one thing. He had the kind of public reputation that made magazines use words like exacting, visionary, disciplined, private. He funded scholarships, trauma recovery programs, forest restoration. He rarely smiled fully in photographs. He looked like someone who had once been handsome by accident and then refined it into intent. When I told my mother I was interviewing for a private chief of staff role, she asked if this was safe. "I'm not joining a cult," I said. "That's exactly what people in documentaries say before they join something strange. I'm going to be answering emails for a rich man." She was quiet for a second. Those are not always different things. The estate sat outside Portland on 40 acres of old timber land that had been cleared in sections and left wild in others. The house itself was stone and glass and cedar, large without trying too hard to look large. The long driveway curved through trees before the main structure came into view, which was its own kind of statement. Real wealth loves a reveal. There was a guest house, a service wing, a detached garage, a greenhouse no one seemed to use, and a separate lower corridor in the east portion of the house that was accessed through a hall with no art on the walls. That was the first thing I noticed about it. Every other hallway had something. Black and white landscapes. Abstract oils. One weird bronze piece that looked expensive and vaguely disapproving. But the east corridor was clean and bare and brighter than the rest, like a hotel that had been told personality was a security issue. The interview took place in a morning room overlooking wet grass and firs. Elliot wore a navy sweater, gray trousers, and no watch I could see, which on a man like that meant the clock lived in everyone else. He asked me about triage, communication systems, error tolerance, vendor management, conflict de-escalation, and whether I preferred anticipatory or responsive work environments. "Anticipatory," I said. He nodded like that was the only acceptable answer. He asked me what my last manager would say my biggest weakness was. That I notice inefficiency faster than hierarchy wants me to. That got the smallest change in his expression. Not a smile. Recognition. At the end he said, I do not need admiration. I need reliability. Good, I said. Admiration would be inefficient. That almost became a smile. When he stood, I knew I had the job. The formal offer came 2 hours later. I signed the next morning. Not in 12 seconds, but not because I spent the night wrestling with ethics either. I spent the night doing division. I calculated what 4.8 million minus taxes minus debt minus the kind of caution I would finally be able to afford would mean. I calculated what a year of discomfort could buy in freedom. I calculated how many ordinary humiliations I might never have to swallow again if I got through 12 months of extraordinary strangeness. There are people who say they would never sell a year of their life. Most of them are already being underpaid for one. I moved in 10 days later. My room was in the north guest wing, though room is the wrong word. It was a suite larger than my old apartment, with a sitting area, a bedroom, a marble bathroom, and closets that made me angry in the abstract. Someone had stocked it with neutral clothes in my size until my own things arrived, which should have felt thoughtful and instead made me feel like I had been processed. My first week was all systems. House maps. Staff lists. Calendar architecture. Gate access codes. Preferred airlines. Preferred tea. Preferred silence. Preferred fonts for printed itineraries. Elliot did not yell. That would have been easier, almost comforting. He simply noticed everything and let the noticing do the work. You learned quickly that he hated status meetings with no purpose, over-familiarity from vendors, and sparkling water after 3 in the afternoon because he said carbonation made people lazy in conversation. I did not know whether that was a joke. Nobody else seemed interested in finding out. He thanked people. That was the disarming part. Every Friday without fail he thanked the household staff by name. Not performatively. Not the way rich people sometimes do when they want to be overheard sounding humane. He meant it. He remembered a pastry chef's son's broken arm. He sent flowers when Marta's sister had surgery. He paid overtime before anyone requested it. He did not belittle. He did not leer. He did not manufacture crises to prove he was central. If he had been openly cruel, I would have distrusted him faster. Instead, he was the kind of difficult that made you feel sharper in his proximity. The kind that convinces ambitious people they are not being consumed, just used well. The staff settled into me carefully. Marta, the chef, was in her 50s and had the kind of competence that makes other adults seem made of paper. Luis handled grounds and exterior maintenance. Nadine oversaw housekeeping and had been there long enough to speak in half sentences everyone else somehow understood. Security rotated, but the lead was a former Marine named Oren who moved like doors should open before he touched them. Nobody discussed the east side. That was the second thing I noticed. Not fear exactly. More like practiced absence. The household ran around it the way water runs around stone. Deliveries labeled horticultural supplies or climate systems were received through a side service dock and disappeared into inventory under Elliot's personal authorization. Any work orders referencing the East Annex were routed only through me and Elliot, never through the general maintenance calendar. Once, 3 months in, a new temp from an agency asked me whether the bright corridor past the library led to the wine cellar. Nadine, who was folding linen nearby, said, "No," with such finality that the girl never asked another question. At first I assumed it was business. Servers, patents, prototypes, whatever rich men call their secrets when they want them to sound work-related. Then the quarterly release hit my escrow account. You would think seeing that much money attached to your name would feel triumphant. It didn't. It felt quiet. Numbing. Like being drugged with future tense. I sat on my bed staring at a number I could not emotionally metabolize and understood, maybe for the first time, what scale does to conscience. It makes questions less urgent. It teaches patience to the wrong parts of you. The clause about the subgrade annex faded. Not because I became less curious. Because the job filled every available corner. My days started before sunrise and ended with tomorrow already on top of me. I handled contractors, legal packets, dinner seating, donor refusals, private flight manifest changes, staffing adjustments, one discreetly disastrous incident involving a minor politician and a medicinal gummy he should not have taken before a fundraising breakfast. I built Elliot's life into a machine and kept it humming. And for a while that was enough. The first crack in that enough came from a florist. It was April, wet and cold, and I was verifying centerpieces for a foundation dinner when one of the delivery men asked where he should leave the lilies for downstairs. Which downstairs? I said. He checked his clipboard. Sublevel east. That's where they always go. Marta, who was beside me checking weights on platters, turned without looking up and said, "No lilies today. Wrong order." The man blinked. "But, wrong order," she repeated. "He left with the flowers." I waited until he was gone and said, "Are there people in the annex?" Marta wiped her hands on a towel and gave me a look so flat it felt like being gently slapped. "There are rooms in every house you don't need to understand to do your job well," she said. Then she took the centerpiece list from my hand and corrected a supplier error I hadn't seen. It was the closest anyone had come to warning me, and even then it felt like the warning had been built more for herself than for me. Summer passed. Sometimes, late at night when I crossed the hall after closing out calendar changes, I heard a low pulse under the east floor. Nothing dramatic. Just a soft mechanical cycling that could have been climate control or water filtration or a generator. Once I smelled damp earth where there should have been cedar polish. Once I found a service invoice for full-spectrum bulbs and hydroponic nutrient concentrate coded to an asset line that did not exist anywhere else on the property books. Elliot took the paper from my hand, thanked me, and fed it into the fire in his study while we were still discussing a charity luncheon seating conflict. "Misfiled," he said. I nodded. People think complicity is always loud. It isn't. Mostly it's a collection of nods you didn't audit hard enough in the moment. In August I found the predecessor. Not literally. A box arrived from a Portland used bookstore, addressed to the estate but with the wrong internal routing code. Inside were 4 out-of-print architecture texts Elliot had once mentioned wanting. Taped to the bottom of the packing slip was a yellow sticky note with a name, Becca Hale. Final invoice sent May 14th. Contact if reship needed. Becca Hale had been the assistant before me. That much I knew because I had inherited a digital archive half-cleaned of another person's systems. Her file structures were cleaner than mine. Her notes sharper. Her departure entry in payroll was abrupt. Immediate term completion, no forwarding contact. I should have ignored the name. Instead I searched it. There was almost nothing online. A LinkedIn profile that had gone dormant. A 3-year-old marathon photo. An old alumni newsletter. But there was an address attached to a property filing in Eugene. I sat with that information for 2 days before doing anything stupid. Then I wrote her a short email from a burner account. "You don't know me. I work where you used to. I have one question. Was there ever a point you wished you had asked about the East Annex sooner?" I almost deleted it. I sent it instead. She wrote back the next night at 1:14 a.m. Yes. No greeting. No why. Just yes. Then 2 minutes later, "If you're still there, do not let him make you feel honored to be trusted." I stared at that line so long my laptop slept. I wrote again. "Trusted with what?" She did not respond. That should have been enough. It wasn't. Because by then the question had stopped being what is down there and started becoming why does everyone around it sound like they're talking about a person. October came wet and loud. Wind moved through the firs hard enough to make the whole property sound full of distant applause. Elliot had spent the day on calls about an acquisition everyone in finance seemed to be treating like a weather system. By evening the house was dim with storm light and full of small preparation noises. Candles checked. Flashlights set out. The backup systems tested as a matter of routine. Then at 10:16 the power failed. Not just the house. The entire grid. For one long second the estate went black. Then emergency power kicked across most of the property in stages. Kitchen first. Hall sconces next. Security systems. Exterior perimeter lights. My room at the end of the north hall. But as I was crossing near the library the east corridor stayed dark. I stopped because the difference was immediate. The rest of the house had come back to life with that expensive, muffled confidence backup systems have. The east hall looked dead. At the far end, where the corridor turned and the access point sat behind a flush-paneled section everyone pretended was just wall, I saw a soft strip of light on the floor that had never been there before. The seal had broken. The panel was open 2 inches. I could tell you I turned around immediately. I did not. I stood there in my socks and listened to the rain hit the windows and the battery-powered quiet of the house around me, and then, beneath that, I heard it. A low repeating sequence. Not human. Not quite. Something measured. Mechanical and musical at once, like a metronome being drowned in water. Then a smell drifted out. Not chemicals. Not rot. Wet soil. Leafy things. Cold stone after rain. I took one step closer before my body came back online. Then I walked away. Not fast. That would make it melodrama. Just steadily. Deliberately. One hallway, one stair, one locked bedroom door between me and the fact that my pulse was beating in my gums. I did not sleep much. I made myself list harmless explanations. Climate control for rare plants. Experimental materials testing. Some kind of archive preservation system. Elliot had enough money to have a subterranean vineyard if he wanted one. But each explanation failed for the same reason. No one warns staff away from tomatoes like that. The next morning I told him. Not because I was brave. Because I was trying to be correct. There is a personality type that mistakes technical compliance for safety. I have that type living somewhere in me. The contract said not to seek access, request information, or discuss the area unless directed. It did not say what to do if the area opened itself in front of me. So I did what scared professionals do. I brought the anomaly to the principal. We were in the breakfast room. Rain still streaked the windows. Elliot was reading printouts, not a tablet, because he belonged to that class of wealthy men who made paper feel more authoritative just by touching it. The east panel lost power last night, I said. The seal disengaged for a few minutes. I didn't enter. I wanted you to know. He did not look up right away. He finished the paragraph in front of him. Set the page down. Folded his hands once. Then he lifted his eyes to mine, and for the first time since I'd known him, there was nothing managerial in the look. No scheduling. No evaluation. No practical request forming behind it. Only calculation. How long was the panel open? He asked. I don't know exactly. A minute maybe. I didn't stay. Did you see anyone? No. Hear anything? I hesitated, which was apparently enough. He stood up. Come with me, he said. He did not take me downstairs. He took me to the conservatory attached to the west side of the house, a bright glass room that was mostly empty except for citrus trees and wintering herbs. He shut the door behind us and stood with one hand in his pocket looking out at the rain. When I interviewed you, he said, I hired you for judgment. Not obedience alone. That distinction matters now. Something in me tightened. He turned. There is someone in the East Annex. He let the sentence sit. Then before I could speak he added, my sister. The word landed strangely. Not because it was shocking. Because it instantly rearranged every silent thing around the house. I thought you were an only child, I said. So does most of the public. That answer was polished enough to have been used before. He crossed to one of the citrus trees and touched a leaf as if he needed his hands occupied by something living. My sister's name is Mara. She helped build the company in the beginning. She is more responsible for the first decade of my success than I have ever said publicly. 3 years ago, after a series of personal losses and a catastrophic manic episode, she disappeared from that public life. The tabloids were vicious. The board was worse. The state was not equipped to manage someone with her profile. So I brought her home. Home. He said it like a benediction. She lives downstairs? I asked. She recovers downstairs. That correction was gentle and immediate. He went on before I could test it. The annex was originally part of my father's archive level. I rebuilt it for privacy, therapy, sensory control, and medical supervision. Light is regulated. Temperature is stable. There's a hydroponic room and a garden court. The sound you heard was likely irrigation cycling or one of the rehabilitation devices. That explained the smell, the rhythm, the supplies. It also explained nothing important. If it's care, I said carefully, why the clause? Because people turn private suffering into narrative the second they smell it. Staff gossip. Vendors speculate. One person gets curious and suddenly someone's worst year becomes social material. He held my gaze. The clause exists because protection requires boring language. That was a very good sentence. I know because it worked on me. Mostly. What do you need from me? I asked. He exhaled as though some small weight had shifted. For now, discretion. Later, perhaps more. I had intended to keep your role separate from that part of the house until your term was complete. But accidents make decisions for us. He paused. You have done excellent work. I would prefer not to replace you. If I extend a higher level of trust, I need to know it will be handled with care. There it was. Not threat. Promotion. That is how he did things. By the end of that conversation, I was not afraid of a dungeon. I was afraid of becoming one more person who let a polished explanation do too much work. At noon he emailed legal. At 2 I had amended responsibilities and an additional confidential stipend transferred into escrow. The figure was enough to make my chest hollow out for a second. Not life-changing in the shadow of the original contract, but obscene by normal standards. Quiet compensation for expanded duties. He never said the money was connected to his sister. He didn't need to. 3 days later I met her. There are people you can identify from old photographs before they enter a room. Mara Voss was one of them. I had seen her only twice online in old press images I found after the conservatory conversation. In those she had been younger, laughing once, bored once, both times in black, both times standing half a pace out of camera discipline while Elliot occupied it cleanly. Same eyes though. Same sharp, level stare. The entrance to the annex was not dramatic. That was almost funny. No hidden elevator. No iron staircase into Gothic gloom. The panel in the east corridor opened to a clean stairwell and then to a wide underground level with warm concrete floors, indirect lighting, filtered air, and the soft living smell of damp soil. It looked less like a prison than like a magazine article about trauma-informed design. There was a sitting room, a medical room tucked behind frosted glass, a corridor of private quarters, and beyond that, under a bank of recessed grow lights, a long interior garden full of ferns, citrus dwarf trees, and vining things I could not name. And there, sitting at a table with a ceramic mug between both hands, was Mara. She was thinner than in the photos and older in the way private pain ages people unevenly. Dark hair pulled back carelessly. Gray cardigan. No makeup. A faint tremor in her right hand. She looked up when Elliot and I entered and smiled with immediate, almost theatrical brightness. So this is the replacement, she said. Elliot's expression did not change. Mara, he said. This is my assistant. The one before her cried in the pantry, Mara said, still looking at me. Maybe that was 2 before. I lose track. Something in my spine went cold. Elliot said, You've had your medication. So have you, she said pleasantly. Then she held out her hand to me. When I took it, her grip was warm and dry and fully steady. Sorry, she said. I like to greet new people before he edits the atmosphere completely. Elliot moved like he hadn't heard that. This level remains restricted, he said to me. If you're asked to coordinate medical deliveries, dietary accommodations, or schedule adjustments related to Mara, you do so through me or Diane. You are not to change lighting cycles, unlock exterior garden access, or bring in outside devices without my approval. Mara sipped from her mug. He always sounds most reasonable when he's saying no. I looked at her, then really looked. She did not seem like a person in the middle of incoherence. She seemed tired, controlled, irritated in a specific and intelligent way. There was no wildness in her eyes. No theatrical instability. If anything, the instability in the room belonged to the fact that Elliot kept speaking to me as if she were not fully present for her own life. We stayed only a few minutes. Long enough for him to show me the pantry inventory protocols and medication lockbox system. Long enough for Diane, a private nurse in dark blue scrubs, to arrive and greet me with a professional neutrality that was not quite cold and not remotely open. As we went back upstairs, I said, She seems lucid. Elliot's hand paused on the railing. Lucidity is not the same thing as stability, he said. That was another very good sentence. Also, I would learn later, a very useful one for people who want others to mistake snapshots for truth. For a while after that, I let the explanation hold. Not perfectly, but enough. There was an easy story available. Brilliant woman. Public collapse. Protective brother. Private care. Shame, press, governance, family legacy, all the ugly things money attracts when it combines with vulnerability. I had no trouble believing the world would treat a female co-founder with mental illness like Carrion in a silk dress. I had no trouble believing a rich family would choose secrecy over spectacle. And once you believe those things, the rest starts looking compassionate by proximity. I handled specialty food orders, private pharmacy deliveries, one absurd negotiation with a contractor over humidity calibration for the annex garden room. I drafted schedules around Diane's shifts and one weekly visit from a psychiatrist named Dr. Heller. Once, Elliot asked me to source sheet music because Mara preferred playing from paper and refused tablets. Another time he asked me to find recordings of Pacific rain for a sound therapy system because she found real storms intrusive. I did not know whether that was his phrasing or hers. Every now and then I went downstairs with him. Never alone at first. Mara was different each time. Dryly funny once. Quiet another. One afternoon she asked me what month it was, and when I answered she said, "Good. He hasn't managed to steal all of time then." Elliot looked at me over her head and said, "She enjoys language when she's bored." It was such a smooth, dismissive line that I almost admired it. Almost. The first moment I truly doubted him came because of T. In November he asked me to prepare a set of documents for a trust management review. Routine, he said. Internal. I printed the packet, flagged signature pages, and brought it to his study. He skimmed it and said, "Good. I'll need Mara's signature on the board consent and the proxy suspension extension." I looked at him. Extension. Her incapacity declaration requires quarterly maintenance. I had heard the word conservatorship nowhere until that moment. But the packet used cleaner language. Temporary voting proxy. Protective decision authority. Medical governance alignment. The kind of phrasing that launders power through administration. "I thought she wasn't involved in company matters right now," I said. "She isn't." That is precisely what the document reflects. He said it like math. "And she'll review it?" He was writing an email while we spoke. "No," I waited. He kept typing. Then he said, "I'll explain what's necessary." I should have stopped there. I should have recognized the wall he was building one polished brick at a time. Instead I said, "Does she know the proxy is still active?" That got his full attention. For the first time, a small edge entered his voice. Not anger. Annoyance at inefficiency. "My sister knows her condition is cyclical. She also knows public and corporate predators do not pause out of sentiment. You are paid to manage movement, not adjudicate family history." He was right enough to shut me up. I took the packet back to my desk and spent the rest of the afternoon hating the shape of my silence. That night, an envelope appeared in my inbox in the staff portal. No subject. No sender name. Just an internal scan attachment. Inside was a single page from what looked like an old medication log. At the bottom, in handwriting I recognized from archived prep notes as Becca Hales, were 8 words. "Ask why the locks only work from upstairs." I sat frozen at my laptop. The file metadata had been scrubbed. No route, no user. Nothing. I took the elevator down with a tray the next morning because Elliot was in a call and had texted that Mara's breakfast should not wait. Diane was in the med room on the phone. Mara was in the garden court reading. I placed the tray on the table and tried to act normal. That lasted maybe 30 seconds. "Your left eye keeps twitching when you're pretending to be fine," Mara said without looking up. "Good to know. It means you're either angry or finally paying attention." I stood there with my hands clasped too tightly. Then I heard myself ask, "Do the locks only work from upstairs?" Her book lowered 1 inch. She did not answer immediately. Then she closed it around one finger to keep her place and said, "That depends what you mean by work." I must have looked stricken because she actually softened. "Go open the east garden door," she said. "There's an east garden door?" She pointed toward a corridor beyond the citrus beds. I found it. Blast. Beyond it, a walled sunken court I had never seen from outside because the terrain masked it from the main grounds. There was a keypad beside the frame. I touched it. No response. I looked for a release handle. There wasn't one. I went back to her. She was watching me with a level gaze that had none of the coyness Elliot assigned to her. Just fatigue and something like pity. "Now go up the stairs," she said. "Open the panel in the hall. Come back down." "I can't just—" "You can," she said. "You work here." I did. Upstairs, the east panel released with the wall control like it always had. Back down, I tried the garden door again. This time the keypad glowed. The door unlatched. I stared at it. Mara looked at my face and nodded once. "There it is," she said. "The small, honest miracle of architecture." I shut the door very carefully. "Why?" She smiled without humor. "Because people feel kinder when the garden exists. Because a locked room with plants photographs better to the conscience than a locked room without them. Because my brother likes solutions that preserve his sense of himself. Diane entered then, took one look at the room and said my name in a warning tone. Mara leaned back in her chair and opened her book again. See, she said. Even now, I'm the difficult one. Upstairs, I almost called Elliot immediately. Instead I went to my room, shut the door and sat on the rug like a child because standing felt too declarative. There are facts that do not become true gradually. They click. The garden door only worked after the upstairs panel had been opened. That meant the default assumption built into the annex was not care. It was containment. I kept trying to rationalize it. Safety locks. Self-harm prevention. Wandering risk. Medical protocol. But each explanation arrived a fraction later than the knowledge itself, which had already taken a seat. If Elliot had told me plainly, I could have argued with what he meant. He had chosen instead to let design say it for him. I replied to Becca's old email chain from the burner account. You were right. She answered within an hour. Get out before he decides you belong inside the story. I wrote back immediately. I need more than that. This time she asked for a phone number. We spoke from my car in the estate's outer gravel lot with the engine running and the windows fogging while rain pressed at the windshield. Becca sounded older than I expected. Not in years. In aftermath. He starts with partial truth, she said. That's how you end up defending him to yourself. How long were you there? 11 months. Did you meet her? Yes. Was she sick? A long pause. She had been, Becca said finally. That's what makes him dangerous. He's never working from pure fiction. He just refuses to update reality when reality stops serving him. That sentence landed so hard I had to look away from the windshield, as if the trees might have an opinion. Becca went on. Mara had suffered a documented manic episode after a brutal year. Their mother's death, a failed pregnancy, public litigation over the company, 2 tabloids publishing photos of her outside a clinic, 1 board member privately pushing for her removal. Elliot took over emergency care, brought her home, built the annex, and won praise from exactly the people who should have known better because private solutions always sound elegant to those who can outsource discomfort. At first it probably did help her, Becca said. That's the worst part. He may even have meant it at first. What changed? The merger. There it was. Asteron, Elliot's company, was finalizing a long-pursued acquisition with a defense analytics firm called Varis. Mara opposed it. Publicly before she disappeared, privately after. Their parents' trust structure gave both siblings control rights on major strategic transfers until either party permanently divested or was declared unable to exercise governance. Elliot obtained temporary authority during her psychiatric crisis. Temporary stretched. Then stretched again. Then the language around her life hardened into infrastructure. Did she recover? Enough. That sounded like a blade wrapped in cloth. Enough to read. Enough to track time. Enough to understand documents. Enough to object. Not enough, apparently, to make anyone richer by admitting it. I thought of the proxy extension. The trust packet. The calm way Elliot had said protective decision authority. Why didn't you report him? I asked. Her laugh had no humor in it. To whom? He had doctors. Private nurses. Legal counsel. She was medicated, isolated, and already publicly framed as unstable. I had concerns and screenshots and no power. Also, I was 30 and being paid more money than my father made in 6 years. Let's not dress cowardice up when simpler words exist. I appreciated her for saying it that way. What happened when you left? I didn't leave. I was finished. Meaning? Meaning I stopped helping with document routing. He said our philosophies had diverged. I got paid out and sent away with 3 layers of paperwork and a vague threat about defamation. Did Mara ask you to help her? Not directly. Another pause. She did say one thing. What? She said, if he ever starts telling you he's protecting me from myself, ask him why the protection always seems to line up with quarter-end filings. That was pure Mara. I knew it instantly. After the call, I sat in my car until the windshield cleared and fogged again. Then I went back inside and worked the rest of the day like a woman balancing a tray across ice. The next weeks were the worst kind of slow. Nothing dramatic happened immediately, which meant everything dramatic stayed possible. I watched. That was all I could bring myself to do at first. I watched Elliot route all communications related to the Varis deal through legal channels with unusual urgency. I watched a board meeting get moved twice because Dr. Heller's review of Mara's stability status had not yet been completed. I watched Mara receive visibly higher medication doses on days with outside psychiatric contact and lower ones on quieter weeks. I watched Elliot become gentler with her exactly when her objections grew sharper, which is a style of control many people mistake for tenderness. One afternoon I brought her sheet music and found her sitting on the floor beside the indoor citrus bed, elbows on knees, staring at the irrigation line. "What are you looking at?" I asked. "Evidence," she said. Of course she was joking. Then she looked up. "Do you know what happens when they increase the quetiapine on evaluation days?" I said nothing. "It flattens my language first, then my timing, then my insistence." She tapped 2 fingers against her temple. "By the time the doctor arrives, Elliot gets the sister he can protect in public." I wanted, desperately, for that to be exaggeration. Delusion. Bitterness sharpened into theory. But I had seen the medlog patterns. "Why doesn't Diane say anything?" I asked. Mara actually smiled. "Because private care lets you purchase versions of duty. Diane is good at her job. Her job is not the same as mine." "Which is?" "Apparently to remain useful while absent." She stood then and crossed to the piano in the corner of the garden room. Upright, walnut, slightly out of tune in the middle register. She played 4 slow notes with one hand. "Tell me something ordinary," she said. "What?" "Outside. Tell me a boring thing." I swallowed. "The front drive flooded near the second bend this morning." She nodded like she had expected that. "What else?" "Marta is fighting with a fish supplier." "Good." "He keeps saying steelhead and sending salmon." That got a real laugh out of her. "Coward," she said to the invisible fish man. Then she looked back at me and her face changed. "Do you understand the danger of only hearing extraordinary things? The mind starts believing drama is the only reality. That's useful if someone wants your whole world to fit inside their explanation." I thought about that sentence for 2 days. Then Elliot asked me to do something I could not excuse as drift. He called me into his study on a Thursday evening and slid a small amber bottle across the desk. "Dr. Heller adjusted Mara's dosage," he said. "Diane's delayed by traffic and the review team will be here before she arrives. 2 milliliters in her tea, please." I looked at the label. Compounded. No standard manufacturer mark. Patient initials only. "Where's the order note?" I asked. He leaned back. "With Diane. Then she can administer it. She won't be here in time." The study went very quiet. I looked at him. He looked back with that same controlled patience he used when people were one bad decision away from disappointing him. "It's physician-directed," he said. "I am not asking you to improvise. Then email me the instruction." That changed him. Not dramatically. His voice stayed level. But the temperature in the room dropped. "I am extending trust and you are translating it into bureaucracy. That's my job." "No," he said. "Your job is to understand context." I felt something inside me lock. "And what's the context?" I asked. His gaze hardened for the first time since I'd known him. Not loud. Not red-faced. Worse. Precision without charm. "The context is that my sister becomes volatile under review conditions and every period of agitation costs her recovery, our family privacy, and months of institutional noise. The context is that outsiders with clipboards get to leave when they're done while I remain here with the actual aftermath. The context is that if you are going to share my household at this level, I need to know whether you are capable of acting like an adult or merely performing one." There it was. No threat. Only contempt shaped into an invitation. I did. Instead he took the bottle back, placed it in the drawer and said, "Leave." I did. An hour later the review team arrived. Dr. Heller with another clinician and a legal specialist whose smile said she billed for every facial movement. Diane had still not come. Elliot took them downstairs himself. When they came back up 90 minutes later, Dr. Heller looked tired. The legal specialist looked satisfied. Elliot looked like a man whose weather report had come in favorable. The next morning Mara would not look at me. That was worse than anger. I brought breakfast. She stayed by the far citrus wall pruning yellowed leaves from a plant that was healthier than I was. "I should have said no earlier," I said. She kept pruning. "I did say no," I added. "Just late." "Congratulations," she said. "That's how most empires fall. Administratively." I flinched. She heard it and set the shears down. Then she looked at me and some of the acid went out of her face. "He over-medicated me anyway," she said more quietly. "He always has a backup path. That's not on you. It feels like it should be." "Yes," she said. "That's part of his gift." That night I opened every archive file I could legally access and several I could not. I found board memos, trust amendments, insurance invoices for the annex build, security logs showing external garden access disabled, pending psychiatric recommendation, 17 months prior, private transportation manifests for Dr. Heller. And buried in an old legal folder under an innocuous title, I found the one thing Elliot had never intended me to read. A letter from Mara to the board. Unsigned because it had been intercepted before transmission or saved before being sent. Dated 9 months before I arrived. I am not declining treatment. I am objecting to confinement being disguised as treatment after the original emergency has passed. Elliot continues to route all governance matters through a proxy that was supposed to expire. He treats every disagreement as evidence of relapse and every request for independent counsel as agitation. If this reaches anyone who remembers I built Asteron 2, understand this clearly, I am not absent. I am being curated. Curated. It was such a precise and brutal word that I sat back in my chair and shut my eyes. When I opened them again, the room had not improved. There are moments in life when the moral math stops being abstract. Numbers don't matter. Nuance doesn't matter. The only thing left is whether you are going to participate knowingly now that the shape is visible. I printed the letter. Then I burned the printout in my bathroom sink because I was not yet brave enough to be good, only frightened enough to be careful. But I memorized the word. Curated. December was all public performance. The Vari's acquisition moved toward final approval. Elliot hosted 2 donor dinners, 1 pressless holiday reception, and a New Year's board retreat disguised as a philanthropic planning weekend. The house filled with catered ease. Crystal. Linen. Expensive laughter. Important people and Will speaking quietly about resilience and infrastructure. Downstairs, Mara's world narrowed further. Diane took medical leave after what I overheard was a difference of protocol. Her replacement, a younger nurse named Elise, was efficient and obedient in a way that made me miss Diane's neutrality. Mara's outdoor access, such as it was, vanished entirely after a supposed light sensitivity flare. Elliot became softer with her in direct proportion to how much paperwork depended on her remaining categorized as fragile. He was not careless. That is important. He never called her crazy. Never mocked her. Never physically manhandled her in ways I saw. He brought her books, remembered her tea ratio, adjusted the garden humidity when she complained, and listened with real attention when she talked about the architecture of old cathedrals or the stupidity of tech founders who quoted stoicism after 3 clean exits. That is part of what made him hard to name. Cruel men are easier than loving men with corrupted incentives. One afternoon during a break in the board retreat, I was carrying revised schedules when I heard Elliot speaking in the West Hall with Helen Park, Astron's board chair. Until the renewal clears, there's no strategic benefit in provoking her, he was saying. Helen's voice came back low and clipped. You're asking for another quarter. I'm asking for continuity while volatility is managed. She's not a line item, Elliot. No, he said. She's my sister. Which is precisely why I would prefer not to have institutional chaos dressed up as principal. I should have kept walking. Instead I stood there behind the linen closet door like a woman who had already become something she would once have disliked in another person. Helen spoke again. If this ever goes public as coercion, it won't. So certain? I am certain of 2 things, he said. First, Mara is not equipped for scrutiny in her current state. Second, people who actually live with consequences tend to have more stamina than people who visit them for an hour and mistake it for ethics. He sounded wounded when he said it. That was his most dangerous register. The one that made selfishness sound earned. I moved before they rounded the corner and spent the next hour revising donor place cards with hands that would not quite obey me. Later that evening, Helen Park asked me where the downstairs restroom was. There wasn't one accessible to guests, obviously. But the question was odd enough to stop me. Downstairs where? I asked. She watched my face a fraction too carefully. Never mind, she said. Wrong wing. Then she walked away. She knew. Not everything maybe. But enough to ask a question sideways. That changed the map again. Because if Helen knew, then Elliot's secrecy was not total. It was selective. Managed. Shared only with people whose incentives aligned just enough to keep them professionally disgusted and practically inert. In other words, a system. I went downstairs that night. Those are all technically true. The truth beneath them was simpler. I could no longer stand not knowing whether Mara wanted out in a way that was actionable or only in a way that made every room she occupied ache. She was awake in the garden room wearing a blue robe and reading under one lamp. She looked up as if she had expected me specifically. "That's either courage or insomnia," she said. "Probably both." She set the book down face down. "I need to know what you want," I said. She studied me for so long I almost took the sentence back. Then she said, "Want and can are no longer twins down here." "I know." "No," she said. "You know they've been separated." "That's different." "Fair." I sat opposite her. For the next hour, she told me her version in the steadiest voice I heard from her the entire time I knew her. The manic episode had been real. So had the hospitalization. So had the need for privacy afterward. Elliot did not invent her vulnerability. He simply discovered how useful the memory of it could remain once the danger had shifted from psychiatric to financial. At first the annex was voluntary. That matters. She chose quiet. Chose no cameras. Chose controlled light. Chose distance from tabloids and board pressure and the specific humiliation of being discussed as if she were both genius and hazard in the same paragraph. Then the weeks became months. She improved. She asked for independent counsel. Elliot said later. She asked for a different psychiatrist. He said once the press cycle cooled. She asked to go outside unaccompanied. He said after the trust review. She objected to the Vari's talks. He increased supervision. She tried to email the board directly. Her devices disappeared. After that, every protest became material. Agitation. Instability. Perseveration. Fixation. Language is a beautiful tool if you want to build a jail that bills hourly. "Why didn't you run the first time you could?" I asked. Mara laughed softly. "You still think there was a first time?" She held up both hands. The tremor had worsened in the left. Recovery isn't linear enough for righteous timing. Some days I thought he was right. Some days I knew he wasn't and could barely hold a cup. Some days I wanted out and also wanted him nowhere near punished because he was still my brother and once he really had saved my life. She looked at me. "That's the ugliest truth, by the way. People become trapped fastest by those who were once necessary." That sentence has never left me. "What would getting out even look like now?" I asked. She was quiet. Then she said, "Not escape. Evidence." I waited. "He has spent 2 years turning my reality into a management issue. That means if I simply appear upset, I help him. If I simply appear lucid, he says I'm having a good hour. If I accuse him directly, he says paranoia. If I stay silent, he signs for me." She leaned forward. "The only thing he cannot metabolize is independent process. External eyes. Simultaneous eyes. Too many of them at once. Meaning? Not one doctor he hires. Not one lawyer he pays. Not one board chair who can call it concern and move on. I need state review, board exposure, and documentary proof to collide before he can isolate any one of them." It sounded impossible. Then again, so had living below someone's philanthropy while they quoted protection upstairs. "Why tell me?" I asked. "Because you're still early enough in the corruption to hate it." I looked at my hands. "What evidence?" She smiled faintly. "Now you're useful." The plan, if it deserves that word, was built from boring things. Medication logs. Access restrictions. Proxy extensions. Recorded inconsistencies. Delivery invoices proving the annex functioned as long-term habitation, not temporary recovery. Email trails. Astron board retreat schedules. And most importantly, one event Elliot had arranged for the first week of January. A private signing dinner on the estate for the Vari's acquisition and associated trust restructuring, attended by the board chair, outside counsel, lead investors, and 2 state-appointed observers who had to sign off on the extension framework because of family trust overlap. Too many eyes at once. That was Mara's phrase. The problem was getting the right truth in front of them before Elliot could pre-brief it into something manageable. Over the next 10 days I became 2 people. Upstairs I was exactly what Elliot had hired. Sure. Anticipatory. Unruffled. I rebuilt guest logistics after a snow forecast threatened airport timing. I sourced a last-minute burgundy one investor specifically preferred. I edited a speech draft in which Elliot planned to talk about responsibility, stewardship, and the ethics of long-term design without ever choking on irony. Downstairs, I copied everything I could without tripping internal audits. I photographed access panels. I exported med schedules against evaluation days. I recovered deleted internal notices from the operations archive showing Diane's objections about sedation timing. I found a signed maintenance request from Elliot himself specifying that all annex egress controls be consolidated to principal side master access. I recorded a conversation with Elise in which she admitted, without meaning to, that Dr. Heller's dosages sometimes arrived, adjusted per principal preference. I also did one thing I am still not proud of. I stole Elliot's spare authentication token from the valet tray in his study while he was showering before a donor lunch. 5 minutes, a racing heart, and the kind of cold clarity that feels like drowning upright. With that token and his already synced laptop session, I accessed the legal vault long enough to copy the latest proxy extension draft and one internal memo from outside counsel warning that continued reliance on an emergency mental capacity determination may become difficult to defend if Ms. Voss obtains independent psychiatric review. Difficult to defend. They always say things like that instead of saying wrong. I sent copies to a cloud folder Becca had set up under an LLC shell the night after our call. I sent another set to a new burner account. I printed nothing. The closer we got to the signing dinner, the calmer Elliot became. That should have told me something. People like him get nicest when they think the architecture is finally complete. 2 nights before the event, he asked me to join him in the West Conservatory after dinner. We stood among lemon trees and reflected light and January rain ticking the glass. "You've been tired," he said. "I've been busy. You've also been distant." That one I did not answer. He tucked one hand into his pocket. "I should have handled the transition more carefully. I have asked a great deal of you. More than your contract originally contemplated." I waited. He turned slightly, enough that I could see his expression reflected in the dark glass behind him. "You are not wrong to feel strain," he said. "Most people are not built for prolonged proximity to illness, especially private illness. It distorts ordinary moral instincts. There are sentences that reveal themselves only halfway through. By the time I understood this one, he was already using it as a knife. If you've begun to absorb some of Mara's interpretations," he continued, "I won't hold that against you. She is brilliant. She can narrate any room until everyone inside it doubts their role. That has always been her gift. Unfortunately, it scales poorly under pressure." I said very carefully, "You think I've been turned. I think you're empathetic, ambitious, and not yet old enough to appreciate how often care requires looking monstrous from the outside." He said it gently. That was his final form, really. Not tyrant. Martyr. The man doing the ugly thing for reasons too adult for everyone else. He stepped closer. "If you need reassurance," he said, "I can provide it. If what would settle your nerves is a better financial structure, that can be done tonight. If what you require is a clearer sense of your future here, I am prepared to be generous." There it was. Not a bribe. An upgrade. I heard Becca's voice in my head. "Do not let him make you feel honored to be trusted." "What I require," I said, "is sleep." Something unreadable passed through his face. Then the charm returned. "Of course," he said. "Get some." When I turned to leave, he added, "One thing." I stopped. "The people who mistake intervention for virtue are usually gone before the damage fully blooms," he said. "It's the people who stay who have to live among the shards." I did not look back. In my room, I sat on the floor and realized he knew enough to be dangerous but not enough to know where the cracks already were. That was the last night I was merely scared. After that, fear got organized. The signing dinner was set for Saturday. Snow threatened and then missed us by 20 miles, which meant everyone arrived relieved and punctual. The board. Outside counsel. Investors. Helen Park. 2 state fiduciary observers from Salem. A deputy county attorney whose attendance had originally been described to me as ceremonial, which is how powerful people talk about anyone they hope will remain passive. The house looked obscene in the way only polished houses do when something rotten underwrites the brightness. Candles in hurricane glass. Staff in soft black. The dining table set with winter branches, dark china, and low arrangements that would not interrupt sightlines. Elliot in charcoal and white, controlled as a metronome. Mara had been given a higher dose at breakfast. I know because Elise signed the log and I photographed it. By 4 p.m. she was slower. Not incoherent. Just dulled at the edges. Elliot had no intention of bringing her upstairs. The official story, if asked, was that she was resting and not to be disturbed. At 5:30, Becca texted from the secure number. APS contact confirmed. County attorney looped through external channel. Need trigger. Adult Protective Services. The state fiduciary observers were one layer. The county attorney another. APS the real blade if properly aimed. The trigger was simple in theory. At 7:20, just before dessert, Elliot would take Helen and the state observers to his study to review the final trust language before signatures. The county attorney, who was there under the pretense of a governance overlap issue, would join for that segment. My job was to route coffee, print one revised attachment, and make sure the downstairs panel was unlocked from the hall at the exact same time. Meanwhile, Becca, who had driven up that afternoon and was waiting half a mile away with the APS contact, would text the county attorney a folder of documents timed to arrive while they were in the study. If everything aligned, the observers would receive documentary evidence of egress control, medication timing, and proxy concerns at the exact moment Elliot was asking for one more clean quarter of authority. That still would not be enough. Documents can be argued. People can be curated. Mara had insisted on the last piece herself. She was going to come upstairs. I hated that part from the moment she said it. You're sedated, I told her that afternoon. I'm also practiced. You could fall. Then I'll fall in front of witnesses. That's not reassuring. It isn't meant to be. At 6:40 the dinner began. At 7:06, I watched Elliot from the service threshold as he raised a glass and thanked everyone for their patience, rigor, and shared seriousness of purpose. He used words like stewardship and continuity. He talked about complexity with that exact grave tenderness rich men wear when they want their decisions to sound heavier than your objections. At 7:18 Helen Park excused herself to take a call. At 7:19 my phone buzzed once. Becca ready. At 7:20, Elliot stood and invited the fiduciary observers, Helen, outside counsel, and the county attorney to his study. I moved. The east corridor was empty. Of course it was. Everyone important was where they had been meant to be. My hands were steady. That still surprises me. I opened the panel. Downstairs, Mara was already at the foot of the stairs wearing a black dress under a long gray coat and holding the railing with both hands. Elise was nowhere. That meant either she had been sent away or had decided not to see. Sometimes those are the same thing. You shouldn't be standing, I said. Unhelpful, Mara murmured. Her voice was thick with medication but her eyes were clear enough to hurt me. Together we started up. Halfway she stopped and shut her eyes. I thought that was it. I thought the whole thing had collapsed into chemistry and foolishness and my own need to believe the truth could coordinate itself into justice. Then she opened her eyes again and said, "He hates improvisation. Then let's ruin his evening." That got the faintest breath of a laugh. We reached the hall. I supported more of her weight than she would have admitted. At the study door I could hear voices. Elliot's calm cadence. Helen's sharper one. Paper sliding. Someone clearing a throat the way lawyers do when they're about to make caution sound neutral. I opened the door. That is not how you are supposed to enter rooms arranged by powerful men. No knock. No apology. Just the door and the truth occupying the frame. For 2 full seconds no one spoke. I remember every face. Helen Park first because recognition hit hers before shock. The county attorney second because he stood almost reflexively. One of the state observers already looking down at her phone, where Becca's timed folder must have landed. And Elliot. His expression did not shatter. That would be too easy. It tightened, recalculated, and hardened all in one movement. He stood up slowly from the side of the desk. "Mara," he said. "You should not be up." His voice was pure concern. It almost impressed me even then. Mara leaned on the doorframe and looked around the room. "Good," she said thickly. "Enough witnesses." No one moved. Then the county attorney said, "What is going on here?" Elliot answered instantly. "My sister is in active treatment and has come upstairs against medical instruction. She should be seated." Mara laughed once, unsteadily. "You hear that?" she said to the room. Everything becomes grammar with him. I stepped forward before Elliot could close the distance. I have documents, I said. Access controls. Medication timing. Proxy extensions. Internal counsel warnings. She has been confined below under the language of recovery while her governance rights were suspended and renewed. The outside counsel began. That is an extraordinary characterization. The state observer cut him off. We just received files suggesting external egress from the annex is principal controlled only. Helen Park looked at Elliot like she had reached the end of her private generosity. Tell me that isn't true, she said. Elliot did not answer her. He looked only at me. Did you steal from me? He asked. It was such a revealing choice of sentence that even there, some part of me went cold with understanding. Not did you fabricate. Not is she safe. Not how dare you. Did you steal from me? Mara heard it too. She smiled with actual sadness. That, she said to the room, is the whole house in one line. The county attorney stepped toward her. Ms. Voss, do you want medical assistance? No, she said. I want independent review, independent counsel, and a door I can open from my side. One of the fiduciary observers was already on the phone. The other had gone pale. Elliot finally moved then, not toward Mara but toward the desk phone, perhaps thinking process could still be reassembled if he reached it first. Helen said, sharp as broken glass, don't. He stopped. For the first time since I had known him, the room did not take his shape. What followed was not cinematic. No one screamed. No one confessed in monologue. No police burst in on cue. Real collapse is procedural. The county attorney called APS and requested immediate emergency presence. Helen Park asked for copies of everything in the folder and then asked Elliot, in a voice I suspect he had once found useful, whether his outside counsel had advised him to continue seeking proxy control while his sister remained physically restricted on the estate. His counsel said, we need to pause this discussion until what? Mara asked. Her words were starting to slur from fatigue but the blade in them remained clean. Until he gets me downstairs again? That silenced the room better than volume ever could. APS arrived 42 minutes later with a crisis clinician and a sheriff's deputy whose entire job seemed to be occupying doorways like a fact. They separated everyone. Mara was medically evaluated on site and transferred to a hospital for independent observation over Elliot's protests, which were by then elegant and useless. Elegant is the word I keep coming back to. Because he never became crude. Even as his control drained away, he framed himself as protector, steward, exhausted family member facing misinterpretation by people who did not understand the history. He even looked at me once, while APS photographed the annex and the deputy documented access controls, and said quietly, you have no idea what happens to people like her once institutions smell vulnerability. I answered him before I could decide whether it was wise. You made sure she never had the chance to find out. That was the first time all year I watched him fail to answer. By midnight, the signing dinner was over, the Vari's documents and signed, the county attorney very much no longer ceremonial, and the estate full of voices that had stopped lowering themselves to match Elliot's preferred temperature. I did not go to my room. I packed. Not much. Most of what I had brought fit into 2 suitcases because 1 year inside somebody else's system does not encourage spiritual accumulation. At 1:30 a.m. while I was zipping the larger case there was a knock. I opened the door expecting Helen or the deputy or nobody sane at all. It was Elliot. He looked exactly as he had at breakfast that morning except older by some invisible measure. Same charcoal trousers. Same white shirt. No tie now. No performative disarray either. He had not broken himself for the benefit of the moment. We stood there with the hallway lamp between us. I wanted to see whether you were leaving as a coward or a victor, he said. The cruelty of it almost relieved me. Finally, something plain. Which would help you more? I asked. One corner of his mouth moved, not enough to be a smile. I did save her once, he said. I believe that. And you think that counts for nothing? No, I said. I think you decided it should count forever. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, you will discover in your own time that almost every arrangement people call freedom is maintained by someone willing to do the ugly thing and be hated for it. Maybe on another night in another life, that line would have worked on me a little. But by then I had watched too much grammar do the work of chains. The ugly thing, I said, was not saving her. It was refusing to notice when rescue turned into ownership. That landed. I know it did because he finally looked away first. He left without another word. I never saw him in person again. The next months were all paperwork and statements and the specific nausea of telling the truth repeatedly until it sounds less like truth and more like a room you're trapped in. APS opened a full investigation. The county sought emergency suspension of Elliot's decision authority over Mara's personal and financial matters pending independent review. Astron delayed the Vari's acquisition indefinitely and then, under board pressure and media leaks nobody could ever tie directly to me or Becca, abandoned it entirely. Helen Park survived by discovering a spine at the exact moment it became professionally essential. Dr. Heller resigned for health reasons. Outside counsel issued a statement dense enough to suffocate small animals. The public version, when it finally broke, was careful and ugly in all the predictable ways. Questions of private care. Questions of consent. Questions of overreach, capacity, fiduciary conflict, and whether wealth had created a shadow system around one family's crisis. Some outlets called it guardianship abuse. Others softened it into governance controversy. Elliot released a statement expressing heartbreak over the weaponization of complex family medical history. That was his last true act of authorship. Mara spent 5 weeks in hospital review and then moved into a supervised residential program of her own choosing. Not glamorous. Not cinematic. A real place with rules that weren't written by her brother. She fired half the experts around her. Hired one she trusted from before. Slowly, publicly, stubbornly re-entered the world through process rather than triumph. Which is how real exits usually happen. Becca sent me a single text after the first court hearing. You stayed long enough to break it. I stared at that one for a while. Then I wrote back, no. It was already broken. I just stopped calling it design. The money is what people always ask about next. I did not get the completion bonus. Obviously. The escrow releases already vested to me became part of a legal dispute for a while, then a settlement, then a number that arrived with so many signatures attached it felt less like payment than residue. I paid my loans. Bought my mother a house with 1 floor and a porch she still insists is too nice for her. Sat in silence for days at a time because choice itself had become exhausting. I also learned that money from the wrong year does not feel like freedom right away. It feels like evidence. About 6 months after the hearing, Mara wrote to me. An actual letter. Cream paper. Black ink. Sharp, slanted handwriting. She did not thank me. That would have made it sentimental and inaccurate. She wrote, for a while I was furious with you for arriving late to the truth. Then I remembered that late is still a form of arrival. Also, the outside world remains tedious. This oddly is reassuring. At the bottom she had added one postscript. The first day I opened a door from my own side, I laughed. I cried when I read that. Not because it was beautiful, though it was. Because it was so small. And after a year inside Elliot's house, I trusted small things more than grand ones. Sometimes I still think about the first time I walked down into the annex and saw the citrus trees glowing under artificial light. How carefully it had all been made. How cleanly. How much intelligence and money and taste had gone into building a place that could pass from the right angle as mercy. That's what stays with me more than the hearings or the articles or even the night we opened the study door. Not that there was a woman living below a billionaire's house. That was the headline. What stays is the architecture. The way he built every explanation to be just plausible enough, just caring enough, just expensive enough that other people could enter it and feel sophisticated instead of implicated. Some doors are built to keep danger out. Some are built to keep witnesses comfortable. Elliot's did both. For a while I was one of them. That is the part one own. Not forever. Not alone. But fully. The investigators asked me later, during one of the final sessions, why I had lied the first time. I told them the truth then. Because by the time you understand a house was designed around a silence, you have usually been living inside it longer than you want to admit. That answer made it into a report somewhere. It is probably quoted in a file with my name on it and Mara's and Elliot's and several lawyers who still sleep well because they charge enough to confuse conscience with invoice structure. Fine. Let it live there. For me, the story is simpler now. I took the job because I needed money badly enough to mistake a sealed room for a detail. I stayed because the room slowly learned my language. And I left because one day the lock stopped looking technical. It started looking honest. That changed everything. That was the last rule he ever gave me.